Today I'm going to show you how I make my Darcy bloomers. I have been wanting to make a sewing pattern for a very long time, and I wanted to make something quite easy to make but still very much my style. I also have been on an underwear kick lately, and all the bloomers that are on the market are pretty simple, and I wanted to make something a little bit more fun. They're designed with a V-shaped waistline, as most of my garments are. They also have ties at the sides, which I think is really cute. When you buy the pattern, they come with a short version, and the same pattern also features a knee-length version for all of you wanting a little bit more coverage. As you know, one of my biggest priorities is to make size-inclusive garments, so they come in a size XS to 6XL. I wanted to make something that you can wear on its own and as an undergarment, and I think these came out really lovely. I have made all of mine in the Darcy linen fabric, which I use for all my pieces. The fun about making your own clothes is that you can choose the fabric yourself and make it as you wish. The first thing you have to do is choose your size. I would recommend to measure yourself before you choose the size. When deciding your size, I would recommend to go by the hip measurement and not the waist measurement. You will also need fabric, a thick elastic, and some ribbons if you don't want to make them yourself. I am going to show you how you make your own ribbons, but if you don't want to do that, or if you're a beginner, I would highly recommend to just get some bias tape for the ribbons. When you've printed out the pattern, it will come with a front page. It will have a 3x3 square in the front, which you can measure to make sure that it has printed correctly. The printout has coordinates on each page, which makes it really easy to assemble. You just have to look at the number and the letter on the top of the page. This is A1 and B1, therefore they go together. And after B, it's C. When you've mapped it all out like this, I would recommend to cut the page by this line here. This pattern comes with a 1 centimeter sewing allowance. These are all the pattern pieces. This is the same for all sizes. The side panel is optional. I haven't made all my bloomers with the side panel, but it is here if you want some extra coverage because it ties up over the hip at the side. After you've cut out all the pattern pieces, you are going to iron your fabric and then start cutting. When you see a mark like this mark and this mark lines up. So when you cut the fabric, you have to mark these lines here. I usually just snip a little bit into the fabric here to mark where this line is. The most important part of the pattern to get right on the grain line is this yoke, because it has to be a little bit stable in the front. And here again, I mark this line here with a little cut. If you want to make your own ribbons, this is how I do it. There are probably a lot of different ways to do this, but this is just my preferred method. You can choose the width and the length of your ribbons, of course. I usually go with 2.5 centimeters in width. I do not cut these on the bias because that takes way too long, so I just mark 2.5 centimeters on my linen fabric like this, and I cut down. After this, I have figured out the best way is actually just to rip the fabric. It's not all type of fabrics you can do this with, so if you can't rip it, you just have to manually cut it. After you've cut out your ribbons, you should iron them down. I do this the whole length at a time. Once you've ironed it, you just fold it over once and then iron again. Then you are going to fold one side of the ribbon in like this, so it meets the middle line, and then you're going to iron once again. And then you're going to do the same thing with the other side, like this. After you've done this, you will have to cut your ribbons into the length you want. The length I do is 26 centimeters. You can make them as long as you want. And then at the end, you're going to have something that looks like this. And then you have to repeat it for all the other ribbons. To make the ribbons, you have to fold in one of the edges. I do this by leaving one of the sides folded over and then opening the other side, folding down and closing, so you don't have any raw edges at this end. Then you are going to fold over one more time and you will have an ending that looks like this. I think one of the most fun parts about making stuff like this is that it always gives a little bit of a handmade feel, which I absolutely love. Then you're just going to keep folding down the entire ribbon and stitching over this part. Now you should have all these cute ribbons and you can just trim off the extra thread. To start sewing the bloomers, you're going to start with the front pieces, which are going to be a little bit ruffled where the front piece connects to the yoke. Hopefully you have marked where the ruffles start by cutting a little bit into this line here. To create the ruffles, you're going to sew with a very long stitch length from your marked place here and to the end of the bloomer. And you're going to start ruffling the piece by pulling at the thread. And you will have something that looks like this. Repeat on the other side. Then you're going to take this yoke piece and attach it to the bloomer. You are going to match up the mark here and here. And then you have to pin it all the way down to the bottom. It doesn't really matter if it overlaps a little bit here because that's just a sewing allowance. Then you're going to place the ruffles by pinning the outer edge. And then you're just going to move the ruffles around and pinning them in place until they look very nice. And you are going to take the other piece and now you're going to sandwich the bloomer part inside the yoke. Remember to match up once again the markings here. And then you're just going to sew with 1 centimeter sewing allowance over this whole part. Remember that this is going to be sewn with a short stitch length again. Then you're going to be left with something like this, and you can pull out the thread from when you ruffled. Now you're just going to have to repeat on the other side. Now you're going to sew the crotch arch in the front. You can either do this by sewing right sides together and overlocking or zigzag stitching the seam closed. I'm going to show you how I do a French seam, which I think looks really nice in these bloomers. To sew a French seam, you're going to take the wrong sides and put them together. Make sure that this part here lines up, so you'll get a nice V in the front. Now you're going to stitch with 1/2 centimeter sewing allowance through this whole arch. It's very important that you don't pull the arch as you sew. Now it will look like this. Now you're going to iron the seaming allowance to one of the sides. It doesn't matter which. Now, to have a really nicely finished front seam, I usually trim a little bit off of the sewing allowance to make it nice and neat. This is especially important if you work with fabric that frays a lot, like linen. Now you're going to enclose this raw edge by folding the piece over and then pinning it down over itself like this. Now you're just going to sew once again with 0.5 centimeter sewing allowance over this here. That traps the raw edge inside of the seam. Then it will look like this on the inside, which is really beautiful, and no raw seam on that side. Then I just iron it down to one of the sides again. Then you just repeat the same thing on the back piece. Now you have one piece that looks like this, which is the back, and you have the front piece that looks like this. Now you're going to join them together by this crotch inseam. You should do this by using the same technique that you used for the crotch arc. I'm going to do French seam, so I'm going to put them wrong sides together and sew. Make sure to line up where the seams meet here. Now your bloomers should look like this. Now you're going to take the back part of the bloomer and make a tunnel for the elastic at the top. You should start by ironing down the sides about 1 centimeter. This is because we're going to fasten the ribbons here later, and it just makes it much easier. Then you're going to take the top back part and iron it down 1 centimeter. Then you're going to create the tunnel for the elastic by folding this over once again and pinning it down. This part here should be about 2 centimeters. Then you're just going to sew here to create the tunnel. Now it should look like this in the back. Then you're going to iron down the front side as well, about 1 centimeter. Now you're going to attach the waistband. The waistband has to be 1 centimeter across the top. So if you're making your own ribbon, it should be about 4 centimeters. Now we're going to attach the waistband to the front. This we do by taking our lovely ribbon and folding it in half. Then you are going to take the right side of the bloomer and the right side of the ribbon and pinning them together. Make sure that when you get to the end that the side is folded over like this, like we did in the last step. It should look like this now. And now you're going to measure the ribbon to be 26 centimeters long. And now you're just going to sew straight across here. Then I just trimmed down this a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to fold over. Don't trim much, just a little bit. Then you are going to fold over the waistband like this and pin it in place. When you do this, make sure that the back edge overlaps a little bit with the seam that we did earlier, because we are going to sew straight across here. Then when you get to the edge, you just pin it down like this to create a 1 centimeter wide ribbon. Then at the edge, you do the same thing that we did earlier and fold it inside of itself like this. Then you can just sew straight across. When you get to the edge here, just make sure that it overlaps a little bit behind the seam. You can try to sew in the crevice here or at the top of the waistband. It doesn't really matter. It just depends on the look you want. Now you should have something that looks like this. I think it looks quite nice with the machine stitching on the front as well, but if you wanted to, you could hand stitch down the back and it would be even nicer. Now we're going to close the side seam, which means that the bloomers are nearly done. So we are going to take the front part and the back part and pin them together, right sides together like this. Here you have already ironed down the seam allowance for the sides, so you're just going to open that up and pin down the sides. It will look like this at the top, so don't you worry. Make sure that the top aligns, and then you're going to measure down. This measurement is a little bit different depending on what size you're making. When you've measured down, you are going to put a needle here. That marks the line, and you are going to sew just from this marking and down the leg. So don't sew up here. Now it should look like this. Do the same thing on the other side. Now you should have some almost finished bloomers like this. And now you're just going to press down this seam here at the sides. Now we're going to take all your beautiful ribbons and fasten them to the sides to create the closure. This you're going to have to do a little bit by eye. The first ribbon is going to be placed right here, where the yoke meets the shorts. To fasten the ribbon, you're going to open up this folded edge here, placing the ribbon inside like this, and pinning it down. To see where the second ribbon should be placed, you're going to fold this over so that this ribbon meets the edge of the side seam here, like this. And you should mark the middle and then place another ribbon here. Then I sew over these two ribbons. Now you're just going to match where the ribbons should meet on the back side. This can be a little bit finicky, but it makes it so much prettier if you're a little bit careful with placing these so that they line up. Do the same for the second ribbon here. And sew these down as well. To finish this seam, you're just going to fold this over again like we ironed it down earlier, and then fold the ribbon here over so that it looks very nice on the inside. Now it should look like this on the outside and this on the inside. Then you're just going to stitch over these parts with your machine. You have to be careful when you do this because you can end up breaking a needle because it is so thick. So if you want to, you can do this stitch by hand. But I'm going to do it on my machine. Just be careful. I think this looks quite nice. So I'm going to show you once again. You are going to take this ribbon, fold it once over, and then over once again, and then stitch here. Do this very slowly. Now you should have nearly finished bloomers. Now we're going to finish off the top part of the back of the bloomer. You can either do this by taking a very long ribbon and threading it all the way through. I did this on the bloomers I'm wearing right now, but I found that it usually just slips around a lot. So I would recommend to use an elastic instead. I would just recommend to measure out half your waist and stretching it a lot to get a nice length of elastic. Then I'm going to use one of these. This is a loop turner and this is my best friend. You can of course use a safety pin as well, but I'm going to just put it through the top part of the back here and then pull the elastic through. Then you take one of your thick ribbons and put it inside with the elastic and make sure to place it at the top. Then you pull the elastic through and do the same thing on this side. And you are going to stitch over here. If you want to, you can now stitch down the whole length of this to make the seam a little bit prettier. You can also do this on the front if you want to. Now the bloomers are very soon finished. You can now go through and cut all the small threads and make sure that everything looks nice. Now we're going to hem the bottom. I do this by folding over 1/2 centimeter, ironing down, and then folding over 1/2 centimeter more so that it creates a 1/2 centimeter hem. Now we're going to make the tunneling for the elastic at the bottom of the bloomers. This part is marked in the pattern. It's 6 centimeters up from the hem. I'm going to use a friction pen. It's commonly known as a crossword pen here in Norway because it erases by warmth. So when you iron, the pen marks goes away. So I'm going to just mark 6 centimeters up from the hem all the way around the legs. If you don't have this sort of pen, you can always use chalk or any other marking tool you usually use. When you have done this, you're going to take your ribbon and stitch it on. When you do this, you just follow the markings and stitch at the bottom of the ribbon. When I get to the end, I just snip it off and then I fold it over like this so it looks neat and finished. And then you're going to stitch at the top as well. When you get to the other side, I usually just leave a small opening at the top here so that it's easier to thread my elastic through. Now you're actually finished with all the sewing. We are going to iron the bottom of the leg here so it looks nicer. Now we're going to measure the elastic for the thigh. Okay, so now we're going to measure the elastic for the thigh. I haven't put that measurement in the sewing guide because I want you to take your thigh and measure the elastic yourself. It has to be a little bit tight. Now we're going to thread the elastic through. I'm going to use my loop turner, but you can use whatever you want. And I'm just going to push it inside and then do like this. And now we're actually finished with our new bloomers. I think they came out very nice. I think they are such a staple to have in your wardrobe, both for comfort and leisure at home, but also a little bit of extra coverage if you want to wear short dresses and twirl a lot. I really hope that you enjoyed my video and that it was helpful while making your Darcy bloomers. I would love to see pictures. Tag me on Instagram.